Growing up, my grandma, Margaret Maggie Callahan, was the warmest person I'd ever known. She had this soft, powdery scent like fresh laundry and sugar cookies, and whenever I walked through her front door, it felt like stepping into another world. A world where the air was always filled with the smell of cinnamon rolls, and there was always a quilt draped over the couch, waiting for you. She lived in a small, pale yellow house at the end of Oak Street, right in the quiet part of our little Massachusetts town. Every time I stayed over, she'd make me hot cocoa in her favorite blue mug, the one with a chip in the rim. We'd sit on the porch swing, and she'd tell me about the old days, but her stories were always simple: childhood summers, picking blueberries, baking pies with her own mother. Nothing deep, nothing that ever hinted at pain or secrets. To me, Grandma was safe. She was constant. She was the person who never raised her voice, never judged me, and never once forgot my birthday. She had a garden full of tulips and roses, and she'd send me home with fresh flowers every Sunday afternoon. She wore the same old watch every day, even though it didn't work anymore, and when I once asked her why, she just smiled and said, "Some things you keep for love, not for time." I didn't think much of it then. My parents always said I was her favorite grandchild. I wasn't sure if that was true, but I knew I felt closest to her. She'd been there for me during my roughest middle school years, when I didn't have many friends, when I was getting bullied for my braces and awkward clothes, when my parents were too busy working double shifts to notice I'd stopped eating lunch at school. Grandma noticed. She'd pack extra snacks in my bag. She'd take me shopping at thrift stores and help me put together outfits that made me feel confident. She even showed up to one of my school talent shows, sitting in the front row, clapping louder than anyone, when my parents couldn't make it. But despite all the love she gave, Grandma never talked much about her own past. I knew she'd grown up in the same town, that she'd worked as a school librarian for over 30 years, and that Grandpa, whom I never met, had passed away when my mom was just a teenager. My mom told me he died in a car accident. Grandma never mentioned him. I didn't push. Everyone has things they don't want to talk about. When Grandma passed away at 82, it felt like a piece of my heart had been ripped out. It happened in her sleep, in that little yellow house she'd lived in for most of her life. I was 20 then, a sophomore in college, and I drove straight home the moment my mom called. The house was eerily quiet when I arrived. Her tulips were in full bloom outside, swaying gently in the wind, but inside, it felt frozen in time. The blue mug was still on the kitchen counter, a tea bag steeping in cold water. Her knitting needles rested beside the couch, half a scarf dangling from them. We buried her on a rainy Thursday. The whole town came: former students, neighbors, church friends. People told stories about her kindness, her homemade pies, her gentle wisdom. My mom cried quietly through the whole service, gripping my hand so tightly my fingers ached. After the funeral, Mom said we needed to start sorting through Grandma's things. I offered to help. It felt wrong to just leave her house untouched, like she'd never left. We started with the living room, going through photo albums, stacks of old magazines, and shelves of knickknacks. Most of it was what you'd expect: family pictures, recipe cards, crocheted blankets. It wasn't until the third day that I found the attic key. It was in a small tin box inside her sewing cabinet, along with a few buttons and a faded Polaroid of her standing in front of a building I didn't recognize. She looked younger, maybe in her 20s, wearing a bright red dress and smiling at someone off camera. There was something about that smile. It wasn't like the gentle one I'd always known. It was wider, livelier, almost daring. "Have you ever been in the attic?" I asked Mom, holding up the key. She frowned. "Not really. There's just old junk up there. We never had a reason to go. But I had a reason now." That evening, when Mom went home to rest, I stayed behind. I stood at the bottom of the narrow pull-down ladder that led to the attic, the key cold in my hand. The air felt heavier up there, like it had been holding its breath for decades. When I unlocked the small padlock and pushed the creaky wooden door open, the smell hit me first: dust, mothballs, and something faintly sweet, like old perfume. I flicked on the single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. Stacks of boxes lined the walls, some labeled Christmas, school papers, or old clothes. But in the far corner, under a faded quilt, was a large wooden trunk. I pulled the quilt aside. The trunk was locked, but the attic key fit perfectly. When I lifted the lid, I didn't find the usual keepsakes or holiday decorations. Instead, it was filled with stacks of envelopes, bundled with ribbon. Hundreds of them, all neatly arranged in rows, some yellowed with age, others still crisp. Each envelope was addressed in the same elegant handwriting, but they weren't addressed to Grandma. They were from her, and none of them were sent to my grandfather. My heart began to race. The top bundle had letters dated from the 1960s. I opened one carefully. Dearest Thomas, I can't stop thinking about last night. Every time I close my eyes, I hear your laugh, see your face in the moonlight. I don't know how we'll make this work, but I know I can't let you go. I froze. Thomas? Who was Thomas? And what did she mean by make this work? The more I read, the more questions formed in my mind. These weren't casual letters. They were love letters. Deep, passionate, desperate ones. And yet, my grandmother had never once mentioned a man named Thomas in her entire life. I sat there in the dusty attic, letters spread around me like fallen leaves, realizing with a growing sense of unease that the woman I thought I knew might have been living a completely different life before I was even born. And for the first time, I wasn't sure I wanted to know the truth, because something told me it was going to change everything. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my grandmother's handwriting, those sweeping, deliberate curves, the way her ink trailed off at the ends of sentences, like she had more to say but couldn't put it into words. Thomas. The name felt foreign on my tongue, like it didn't belong in the same world as the gentle, pie-baking grandmother who taught me how to sew and always kept a candy jar full for the neighborhood kids. The attic key was still in my pocket. I must have touched it 100 times, as if making sure it was real. I told myself maybe Thomas was just a friend. Maybe she was writing for someone else. Maybe these were drafts she never sent. But the more I thought about that first letter, the more I knew I was lying to myself. She'd written about longing, about stolen moments, about fear of being found out. By morning, I couldn't take it anymore. I skipped breakfast, drove back to her house, and went straight to the attic. I opened another letter, dated September 14th, 1964. Thomas. It's getting harder to pretend when I see him every day. He doesn't suspect anything, but I can feel the guilt pressing on me like a stone. And yet, when I'm with you, I forget all of it. I feel alive. I feel like the person I was meant to be. Him. She didn't say who, but I didn't need to guess. The year matched when she was still married to my grandfather. My chest tightened. I dug deeper into the stack, opening letters from different years. In each one, her voice changed slightly, sometimes hopeful, sometimes desperate, sometimes almost ready to give up. But one thing stayed the same. She loved him. And not in the way you love a childhood friend or an old crush. This was the kind of love people risk everything for. The more I read, the less I recognized her. In my mind, Grandma Maggie had always been a rule follower. She paid her bills early, never missed Sunday service, and returned library books exactly on time. She was polite to a fault, always putting others before herself. But the woman in these letters, she was daring, reckless, willing to lie, to sneak around, to live a double life for the sake of one man. I should have stopped. I should have put the letters back and closed the trunk. But I couldn't. And then I found it. At the very bottom of the trunk, under the oldest letters, there was a smaller box. Inside was a stack of black and white photographs. My heart skipped when I saw the first one. It was my grandmother, except younger, maybe in her late 20s. Her hair was pinned up, her lips painted dark, and she was standing on a beach in a swimsuit I'd never seen before. Next to her was a tall man with dark hair, his arms slung around her shoulders like they'd known each other forever. He was handsome in that timeless, movie star way, his smile wide and carefree. On the back of the photo, in her handwriting, were just two words, me and T. I didn't need anyone to tell me who T was. There were more pictures, picnics in the park, walks by the pier, sitting in what looked like a small cafe. In one, she was laughing so hard her head was thrown back, and Thomas was leaning in like he just whispered something only she could hear. And then I found a photograph that made my hands shake. It was the two of them holding a baby. The man, Thomas, was cradling the child, and my grandmother was looking at the baby with a tenderness I'd only ever seen when she looked at me as a kid. The baby wasn't my mom. I knew that immediately. My mom was born in the late 60s, but this photo had August 1962 written on the back. I stared at it for what felt like forever, my brain scrambling for explanations. Was it someone else's child? A relative's baby they were just holding? Or was it? I shoved the photos back into the box, my breath coming faster. I didn't want to think it. I didn't want to imagine the possibility that my grandmother had another child, one my family knew nothing about. But the questions were already eating at me. I spent hours in the attic that day, reading letter after letter, looking for clues. Some were more revealing than others. In one from January 1965, she wrote, Thomas, the hardest part is pretending she's not mine. I watch from far away and tell myself it's better this way. Better for her. Better for everyone. But my arms ache for her. If only things were different. I dropped the letter like it had burned me. She did have a child. And she gave her up. But why? My mind was spinning, caught between disbelief and betrayal. The woman who had been my safe place, my moral compass, had been hiding a secret so big it could shatter everything I thought I knew about my family. I thought about calling my mom right then, but I couldn't. Not without knowing more. If this was true, if Grandma had a daughter she never told anyone about, it wasn't just her story. It was my mom's too. By the time I climbed down from the attic, the sun was setting. I sat on the porch swing, holding that first photograph of her and Thomas, my hands trembling. For the first time in my life, I felt like I didn't really know who my grandmother was. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized if I wanted answers, I'd have to find them myself. Even if it meant uncovering things I might not be ready to hear. For the next 2 nights, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Thomas's face in those photographs, smiling, confident, with that easy charm that seemed to pull my grandmother in. And every time, I thought about that baby. The baby she called hers. I kept going over the math. 1962. My mom wasn't born until 1968. That meant this child would be older than my mom, if she was still alive. The letters didn't give me a last name for Thomas. Sometimes she signed them, yours always, M. And sometimes she didn't sign at all. She never mentioned where he lived or worked. It was like she'd written them as if the two of them already knew every detail and didn't need to say it. That made finding him feel impossible. But I couldn't stop. I started with the photographs. In one, they were sitting outside a diner with a neon sign in the background. The letters on the sign were blurry, but I could make out part of a name. Se, On's Diner. I pulled out my laptop and searched every possible combination, Seaton's, Simon's, Sevron's, until I finally found something. There had been a Sevron's diner in Boston during the 1960s. It closed in the late 80s, but old photos online matched the sign in the picture perfectly. Boston. That was only an hour from where Grandma had lived her whole life. It wasn't much, but it was a starting point. I called my best friend, Casey, the only person I trusted to know what I was digging into. This is insane, she said after I explained everything. Are you sure you want to do this? I mean, what if you find something you can't unknow? I already found something I can't unknow, I said. The only way to deal with it is to know the rest. Casey sighed. All right. So what's the plan? The plan, I said, is to figure out who Thomas was. If I can find him, I can find out about the baby. The next morning, I drove to Boston and headed to the public library. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for, but I started with old newspaper archives. I typed in Severon's Diner and scrolled through dozens of mentions, advertisements, event announcements, even a few photos from local features. And then, in a 1963 community piece, I saw it. Local musician Thomas Whitaker performs weekly at Severon's Diner. My heart nearly stopped. I searched Thomas Whitaker Boston and found a few more mentions, small gigs, charity performances, nothing big. He wasn't famous, but he was known locally. Now I had a full name. The next step was finding out what happened to him. I searched public records, but the trail ran cold after the mid-1970s. No obituary, no marriage announcements, nothing. It was like he just disappeared. On my way home, I kept thinking about the baby. If my grandmother had given her up, there might be adoption records, but those aren't exactly easy to get, especially without a last name for the child. When I got back to her house, I went straight to the attic again. I reread some of the later letters, looking for clues. That's when I found one dated April 1963. See, I saw her today. She's getting so big. I had to pretend I was just a neighbor passing by. She looked right at me, those same dark eyes as yours. I almost cried right there on the street. This wasn't an adoption where the baby was taken far away. She was close enough for my grandmother to see. That meant she'd probably been raised in the same town or nearby. That night, I sat on my bed, staring at my phone. There was one person who might know something, even if she didn't realize it, my mom. But how could I bring it up without giving away what I'd found? I decided to test the waters. The next day, I invited her to lunch. We went to a little cafe she liked, and after we ordered, I casually asked, "Did Grandma ever talk about her life before she had you?" My mom laughed. "Not much. She was always private about the past." "Why?" "I don't know. I was just thinking about how we don't really know much about her younger years." Mom shrugged. "I don't think there was much to know. She met Dad in her 20s, got married, had me. Pretty standard." I hesitated, then said, "Did she ever mention a man named Thomas?" She looked up from her coffee, frowning. "Thomas?" "No, why?" I forced a smile. "Oh, I just came across the name in some old stuff of hers." "Probably nothing." She didn't press, but I could tell she was curious. When we got back to her house, I almost told her everything. I almost showed her the letters and the photographs. But something held me back. If what I'd found was true, then telling her could destroy everything she thought she knew about her mother. And I wasn't ready for that. That night, I called Casey again. "You need to be careful," she warned. "If Thomas disappeared from public records, maybe there's a reason. People don't just vanish." I thought about that long after we hung up. And then I made a decision. If I wanted real answers, I'd have to go beyond letters and old newspaper clippings. I'd have to talk to someone who actually knew Thomas, and the only way to find them was to go back to Boston, not to the library this time, but to the neighborhoods where Severon's Diner once stood. Because somewhere out there, someone remembered him. And if I found that person, I might also find the truth about the child my grandmother never told anyone about. Boston felt different this time. The first time I came here, I was chasing a ghost through dusty archives and grainy photos. Now, I was chasing something living, memories, rumors, maybe even people who still carried pieces of Thomas in their minds. Severon's Diner was long gone, replaced by a sleek coffee shop with polished wood tables and walls lined with bookshelves. But the bones of the building were still there. I stood outside for a long time, imagining my grandmother and Thomas sitting inside, laughing over pie and coffee, never knowing their photos would end up in a dusty attic trunk half a century later. Inside, I ordered a coffee and asked the barista if she knew anything about the building's history. She shook her head but pointed me toward a group of older men sitting in the corner, deep in conversation. I approached, feeling awkward. "Excuse me, do any of you remember Severon's Diner?" One of them, a man with thinning gray hair and a red Sox cap, grinned. "Of course, best pie in Boston back in the day. Why do you ask? I'm researching someone who used to perform here. A man named Thomas Whitaker. The man's smile faded, and he exchanged a glance with the guy next to him. Haven't heard that name in a long time. You knew him? I pressed. Everybody knew Tommy, the second man said, his voice quieter. Played guitar, sang like he meant every word. Had a way of making people feel like they were the only one in the room. That sounds like him, I said before realizing I didn't actually know what he sounded like. What's your interest? The first man asked, narrowing his eyes. He might have known my grandmother, I said carefully. They both went quiet again. The second man leaned in. If you're looking for dirt on Tommy, I'd be careful. Some folks around here still won't talk about what happened. My pulse quickened. What did happen? The man shook his head. Not my story to tell. He stood, tossing some change on the table. But if you really want answers, go see Lorraine. She worked at the diner until it closed. Lives over in Dorchester, near the old train depot. She'll talk, if she wants to. I thanked them, wrote down the address, and drove to Dorchester. Lorraine's building was old but tidy, with flower boxes under the windows. I knocked, and after a moment, a small woman with sharp blue eyes and silver hair opened the door. Yes? She asked, her voice crisp. Hi, I'm sorry to bother you. My name's Emily. I'm looking for information about Thomas Whitaker. I was told you might have known him. Her eyes narrowed. Who told you that? Two men at the coffee shop where Sevron's diner used to be. She hesitated, then stepped aside. Come in. Her apartment smelled faintly of lavender and old books. She motioned for me to sit at the kitchen table, then poured us both tea. You knew Tommy? I asked. Knew him well, she said. He was special. Could have gone places with that voice, but he never cared about fame. Just wanted to play music and be with her. My heart pounded. Her? Lorraine's gaze sharpened. Your grandmother. The teacup nearly slipped from my hands. So you do know who I am? She nodded. You've got her eyes. Maggie was a good woman, but she was caught in a bad situation. I swallowed hard. I found letters. And photos. And a baby. Did she? Lorraine's face softened. Yes. The baby was hers. Yours to know or not, but since you're asking, her name was Anna. She was born in '62. My stomach dropped. What happened to her? She was given to another family, right here in Boston. Maggie and Tommy, they wanted to keep her, but your grandfather, well, the man Maggie was married to, found out about the affair. He told her if she didn't give up the baby, he'd ruin Thomas, get him blacklisted from every venue in the city, and take Maggie's life apart piece by piece. The words felt heavy, like they were pressing down on my chest. So she gave her up. She didn't have a choice, Lorraine said. But she never stopped watching from a distance. Every birthday, every milestone. She found ways to see Anna, even if Anna never knew who she was. I gripped the edge of the table. And Thomas? Lorraine hesitated. He left Boston a few years later. Rumor was, he went south, tried to start over. But some say he came back, quietly, to see Anna too. And then, he just vanished. No one ever saw him again. Her eyes met mine. If you keep digging, you might find him, or you might find out why he disappeared. But I'll warn you now, Emily. Not everyone will be happy you're stirring this up. There are people who've kept these secrets buried for decades. They won't want them dug up. Her words sent a shiver down my spine. When I left her apartment, I sat in my car for a long time, staring at the steering wheel. I had a name for the baby now, Anna. Somewhere out there, I might have an aunt I'd never met. But Lorraine's warning stuck in my head. Not everyone will be happy you're stirring this up. And I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, maybe more than one person, was going to try to stop me from finding the truth. For days after meeting Lorraine, her words wouldn't leave my mind. Her name was Anna. It wasn't just a name anymore. It was a person. Someone walking around in this world who might look a little like my grandmother. Someone who might share my blood. Someone who'd been kept a secret for over 60 years. And I had to find her. I started with public records, narrowing the search to girls named Anna born in Boston in 1962. There were dozens, but only a handful matched the neighborhoods Lorraine had mentioned. Most of them were dead ends, wrong birth dates, no adoption records, or moved out of state decades ago. But then I found her. Anna Peterson. Born August 14, 1962. Adopted as an infant. Still living in Massachusetts. The address was only 40 minutes away. I stared at the listing for a long time. It felt wrong, almost invasive, to just show up at her door. She had no idea I existed. No idea her birth mother had been my grandmother. No idea her story had been hidden in an attic all these years. But the longer I thought about it, the more I realized if I didn't go now, I might never get the chance. The next morning, I drove to the address. My palms were sweating on the steering wheel. It was a modest white house with blue shutters and a small garden in front. I sat in the car for a full 10 minutes before finally getting out and walking to the door. When she answered, I almost forgot how to breathe. She looked like my grandmother. Not exactly. Her hair was darker, streaked with gray, and her eyes were hazel instead of blue. But there was something about her expression, the way her eyebrows arched when she saw me, that made my chest ache. Yes? She asked, cautious. Hi. My name's Emily. I know this might sound strange, but I think we're related. Her eyes narrowed. Related how? I took a deep breath. My grandmother was Margaret Callahan. And I believe she was your birth mother. For a long moment, Anna just stared at me. Then she shook her head. That's not possible. My birth mother's name wasn't Margaret. I know, I said quietly. She couldn't put her real name on the records. But I found letters. And photographs. She wrote about you. She never stopped thinking about you. Anna's face changed, not to relief or joy, but something closer to suspicion. Who sent you? No one, I said quickly. I found everything after she passed away. I thought you deserved to know. She hesitated, then opened the door wider. Come in. Her living room was warm and tidy, with family photos on the walls. She motioned for me to sit. Tell me, she said, folding her arms. So I did. I told her about finding the letters in the attic, about Thomas, about the photographs, about Lorraine's story. I didn't leave anything out, not even the parts that made my grandmother sound less like the saint everyone believed she was. When I finished, Anna was quiet for a long time. Finally, she said, I always wondered. My adoptive parents were wonderful, but they couldn't tell me much. Just that my birth mother was young and couldn't keep me. I used to imagine she was dead, or that she didn't want me. Her voice caught. I guess I was wrong. She wanted you. I said, my throat tight. She just couldn't fight the people who wanted to take you away. Anna nodded slowly, but her eyes were glassy. And Thomas? Was he my father? Yes, I said. She loved him. More than I think she ever loved anyone else. Anna leaned back in her chair, covering her mouth with her hand. I wish I'd known her. I wish. She trailed off, shaking her head. But I guess it's too late now. I hesitated. It doesn't have to be too late to know her story. I can give you the letters. The photos. Everything I found. She looked at me for a long time, then gave a small, sad smile. I'd like that. We talked for hours after that. About our lives, about my mom, her half-sister, who still had no idea Anna existed. We didn't make any promises, didn't rush to decide what to do next. But when I left, I felt lighter. Like some of the weight I'd been carrying since that first day in the attic had finally shifted. Still, there was one piece missing. Thomas. I didn't know if he was still alive, but I couldn't shake the hope that maybe, somewhere, he was out there. I started searching again, more public records, more newspaper clippings. And then, one evening, I found a tiny obituary from 1998. Thomas Whitaker, beloved friend and musician, passed peacefully at the age of 61. No mention of family. No mention of Anna. Just a quiet goodbye in a small town paper. When I told Anna, she cried. I think we both did. Because even though neither of us had met him, we knew he was the reason we were sitting in each other's lives now. Weeks later, I went back to my grandmother's house one last time. I stood in the attic, surrounded by the letters and photos, and realized something important. The woman I thought I knew, the safe, gentle, perfect grandmother, wasn't the whole truth. She had been brave and reckless and complicated. She had loved deeply and lost painfully. She had made choices that hurt, but also ones that kept the people she loved safe. And maybe that made her even more real. I packed the letters and photos into a box and drove them to Anna. When she opened the door, I handed them over without saying anything. She looked at me for a long time, then hugged me, tight, like she was holding on to something she'd been missing her whole life. We still don't know what will happen with our family. I haven't told my mom yet. That day will come, and it will hurt. But when it does, at least the truth will finally be in the open. Because the attic taught me something I'll never forget. Sometimes the people we love most are the ones we know the least. And sometimes, the truth, no matter how painful, is the only thing that can set us free.